It's been 115 years since investors had an opportunity like this. The Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, and Henry Ford made a fortune from the last energy-powered vehicle revolution. Let's seize the moment in the hottest sector in the world right now. Visit crushthestreet.com/win.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into crushthestreet.com. I'm joined today with Jeffrey Nielson of Bullion Bulls Canada. You can also read his work at Sprott Money. You know what? This man has been calling what we've seen in precious metals a fake rally. I've spoken to him a couple times throughout the year, and he says this is a fake rally. And sure enough, with gold at 12 and a quarter and silver below $17 here, it's certainly appearing to be so. So he's got amazing analysis, he's articulate, and he's going to give us his thoughts on the economy here. Jeffrey Nielson, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Kenneth. Always a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's start off with gold here. Gold has been pulling back after Trump, when most people thought gold was going to take off and shock the markets because Trump wasn't supposed to win, and everyone compared it to Brexit. Your thoughts here?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not surprised in the least here because, as you pointed out, I was expecting the market to turn lower because, and let me just back up a bit in terms of why I was expecting or calling this a fake rally all along. My own views are that precious metals are not just undervalued, they're ridiculously undervalued. The price of gold should be at an absolute minimum somewhere above $5,000 an ounce. The price of silver should be several $100s an ounce at an absolute minimum. And so when I looked at the very slow advance in prices at the beginning of this year, and I looked to where precious metals prices should be if they were going to approach a rational valuation, it just looks silly. As I wrote in an article a few months ago, it would have taken the precious metals markets about 8 years just to get to some minimum valuation that the metal should have already hit in 2014. So, when you see a rate of advance that slow, it just doesn't look natural. And of course, the other thing is that, as you know from our previous conversations, I'm firmly of the opinion that the banking crime syndicate has been totally controlling these metals markets for many years, and I saw nothing at all to indicate that they had lost control, or they had lost that control of the markets. So they certainly weren't just going to let the metals prices go merrily upwards without doing anything about it. And so I had to assume that they were deliberately allowing metals prices to rise as a fake out in order to let prices go up far enough that they could crash the markets. And so this is, of course, is what I've been saying all along, is that the bankers want to crash these markets in conjunction with crashing the broader markets because they don't want the general public to see precious metals level or even holding their own when other markets are crashing. So they took these markets up so that they could be crashed with everything else. Now, as for Trump and the election, I think this just goes to illustrate the phoniness of the mainstream media. Because, of course, what did we hear before the election when they were looking for an excuse to drive metal prices down? We were told that Hillary was good for the economy and Trump was bad, and Trump was good for precious metals and Hillary was bad. So, of course, now we've had the election, and now we're told, from 2 minutes after the polls close, oh, well, Trump's good for the economy and he's bad for gold. And, of course, there was never any sense with what they were saying about Hillary and Trump before the election. There's no sense at all with what they're saying afterwards, and of course it's completely opposite to what they were saying. So I think this is about as vivid an illustration as you'll get that the mainstream media has no credibility whatsoever with respect to anything to do with the economy.
Well, it's interesting. Even gold bugs are getting optimistic about the economy with Trump getting elected, and you know what? Whether it's his taxes, he's got a Republican Congress here, and people are, Dow 30,000, I'm hearing some people say. And you know what? Is it that perception that is causing gold to go down and the markets to go up?
Well, if it was perception alone, I would just ask you to look at the night of the election, because what did we see? We saw in fact, gold spike up about $60 an ounce
That's right.
in the hours immediately after the election, and then get stuffed right back down again. So, of course, that's the whole point is, perception doesn't do a U-turn in a matter of hours for no reason. Perception can't do a U-turn at night when everyone's asleep. So, this is the whole point. And I mean, we see these things happen all the time. We see markets reversing for no reason, and then the mainstream media invents some bogus explanation that doesn't hold the slightest bit of water. And so, I mean, we're seeing all this nonsense now about, oh, yes, inventing reasons why Trump is good for the economy when they were doing the exact opposite week after week prior to the election. And there's no more substance in what they're saying now than what they were saying before the election. And of course, as you know from our previous conversations, I'm firmly of the opinion that both parties are completely owned by the establishment, and it makes absolutely no difference which half of the two-party dictatorship is sitting in the throne as far as what's going to happen in the economy.
Yeah. No, I agree with you completely on that, and we're already seeing Trump appoint people that are extremely establishment, Goldman Sachs even, and Ryan's previous. Jeffrey, let's talk about the dollar here. The strengthening dollar. Last I checked, the dollar index was around 100. And in terms of dollar strength or dollar weakness, it's a double-edged sword for the economy. Is it bad either way with what we're seeing here? Strong dollar, weak dollar, but in this case, a strong dollar?
Well, this is more mythology that has been pumped out by the mainstream media, not just for years, but for decades. And you see, you have to understand that the banking crime syndicate is dedicated towards diluting and devaluing our currencies right until they take them down to worthlessness. So they invented all this mythology that destroying the value of currencies is somehow good for our economy. And of course, all we have to do is just turn the clock back 50 years. 50 years ago, the U.S. economy was far and away the strongest economy in the world. And what did we have during that era? We had the strong dollar policy, quote unquote. The U.S. dollar was flying high. The U.S. economy was flying high. So the idea that we need currencies to be low in order for economies to fly high has no substance. It's exactly opposite to the truth. If you want, and in fact, the point here is that if you have a strong economy, you're going to have a strong currency. Now, this does not apply to the U.S. economy right now because, as I've said many times in the past, the U.S. dollar is worthless. The U.S. economy is bankrupt. But of course, we have these big banks, these convicted currency manipulators who have been convicted of manipulating all of the world's currencies going back to at least 2008. And they want to prop the dollar up, and they want to push all the other currencies down to try to make the U.S. economy appear strong. So, of course, this is the more of the mythology. Look at how high the dollar is. The economy must be strong. Well, you've got these convicted currency manipulators pushing it up every day. I mean, it's not exactly rocket science here. And of course, again, where's the mainstream media? Did they not notice that all the big banks got convicted of manipulating all of the world's currencies going back to 2008 when they see this ridiculous upward spiral in the value of the U.S. dollar? Does not one person in the mainstream media think to themselves, I wonder if it has anything to do with these convicted currency manipulators? I mean, it's just so ludicrous. We have these people, I mean, it's see no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. I mean, it's the three blind mice. And I mean, this is what the mainstream media, the role they play day after day.
Well, and now interest rates, we have interest rates potentially rising. At least they're talking about it. I saw 90% odds that they are going to be raising interest rates here in December. But, what does that do? What does a strong dollar do and higher interest rates going to do for borrowers, and specifically foreign borrowers who are highly exposed to U.S. dollar debt?
Well, let's just talk about the primary consequence of higher interest rates. All the economies in the West go bankrupt. I mean, it's real simple. None of these economies can pay the interest on their debts if they have to pay a market rate of interest. And that's why interest rates have been manipulated to these near zero levels and held there forever. And that's why the Federal Reserve has been talking about raising interest rates for 8 years and doing nothing. And of course, once again, I ask your audience to backtrack to the end of 2008. And for those with functional memories, think about what those liars in the central banks were saying. The Federal Reserve and all the rest of these criminals said, we are going to normalize interest rates immediately in 2009. Absolutely, 100% for sure, because we will never copy Japan.
Right, right.
So, of course, what have we seen? No interest rate increases, and they have copied Japan. And in fact, I put out an article about a year ago where the big banks admitted that we've been copying Japan.
Yeah.
So nothing that these liars say in the central banks has an ounce of credibility. And I mean, the idea that there's a 90% probability of the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, it's absolutely hilarious, because what's going to happen, of course, is they're going to contrive some event that's negative for raising interest rates, and they say, well, the Fed has, quote unquote, no choice now but to hold off. And I mean, how often have we heard this over the last 8 years? 30 times? 50 times? 100 times? They talk up raising interest rates for a few months, and then they stage some negative event in the economy and say, oh, well, the Federal Reserve can't act now as much as they would like to, and shed a few crocodile tears. I mean, it is just ludicrous. And I mean, the fact that anybody, even can take this theater seriously just amazes me.
Well, things just turn on a dime, and that's one thing we've certainly have seen here, and how quickly things can change. I want to go back to gold, and it's something I actually wanted to ask you, but I forgot. But Friday, the U.S. markets were closed, but we saw precious metals get slammed, the stock market. And was there anything to it in that sense on Friday that caused precious metals to be manipulated to a larger degree that you saw? Because it was a big market move down.
Well, there was certainly no rational reason in the real world. It strikes me as a little strange that the bankers would slam the markets like that on a quiet day like that. Because, I mean, the point, of course, is with the banking crime syndicate controlling these automated trading algorithms, they can pull prices up and down totally at will. They don't need to ambush the market on a quiet day. So I'm scratching my head over the move on Friday, because there doesn't seem to be any reason for them to have engaged in a slam of the metals prices that dramatically when they can take them down, $15, $20 every day if they want. So I can't give you a good answer to that, because I haven't been able to come up with anything that makes sense as to why that particular day they decided to really hammer the prices extra hard.
And just to point this out, we're doing this interview on November 16th, and we're talking about Friday. That was Veterans Day here in the U.S. Jeff, so I got to give George Soros some credit here. Here back in the summer, he dumped his shares of Barrick, and he timed it perfectly. And here we have news of him going back in to the precious metals markets. Do you have any insight as to this, or any thoughts as to what he's doing here?
Well, I nicknamed George Soros Bash and Buy Soros because he's been playing games in the gold market for several years, and literally, I mean, he was publicly bad-mouthing gold vigorously at one point, and then a few weeks later, the truth comes out that secretly behind the scenes he was buying with both hands. So, but the other side of things is when people talk about investing in gold, quote unquote, I mean, it really depends on what you're talking about. If people are buying units in GLD, they're not investing in gold. They're investing in a trade that's loosely based on the price of gold. And I mean, the point here is, this isn't something that I've uncovered on my own. If you look at someone like James Turk, he was the first person to point this out. If you read the prospectus for GLD, they're not even required to hold any gold.
Right.
The prospectus says that they are required to invest in whatever they want, invest in products that track the price of gold. So, for instance, if by some coincidence the price of tennis balls tended to always closely parallel the price of gold, they could simply be buying tennis balls. They don't have to buy any gold at all because all they're required to do is hold assets which track the price of gold. And so, obviously there is gold being purchased by the unit holders of this fund, but then of course we go to the big banks who are the quote unquote custodians for these funds, and they're also the biggest shorts in the world, and they never have to demonstrate that they have sufficient bullion to back their custodian agreements and cover their short positions. So for me, these banker bullion ETFs are just open fraud, where they get retail investors to buy gold for them so they can use it to back their short positions, and they leave the investors holding nothing but paper in these funds. So, this is when George Soros talks about buying quote unquote gold, that's what he's usually buying, is units of GLD. And so, when you talk about, these market icons buying gold, it's really important to distinguish whether they have bought physical metal, and there's actually some documentation of this, or whether they're just buying paper. Right. And, if they're just buying paper, they could dump it all tomorrow. So, they make a big announcement that, oh yeah, we're buying this, and then they quietly sell it. So, like I say, Soros is notorious for playing games in the gold market, and I really don't attach too much credence to his buying and selling.
Well, and I want to wrap up here with one last question about Trump and the markets. And, we know Trump is going to be a big spender. He's already talking about $1 trillion he wants to spend on infrastructure. And, maybe this has something to do with the markets going higher. But certainly that is inflationary, too. Even if the economy starts doing better. We got a lot of things that are going to put upward pressure on gold here. But specifically the markets. Is it possible that we see the Dow Jones go to 30,000 here based on the situation that we have right now with the president?
Well, it's possible to see these markets go to any fantasy numbers when you simply think about how much funny money the banking crime syndicate has created. And I don't know if we've talked about this before, but the point here is that when you have the fraud of 0% interest rates, and you have the fraud of fractional reserve lending, and you put those two frauds together, what it means is that the banking crime syndicate can legally, and this is important, legally counterfeit infinite quantities of funny money. And the mechanics are very simple here. You get, of course, the Fed created, $4 trillion of its funny money over just a few years. So let's just talk about one of these trillions. So the Fed lends one of these trillions of fantasy money that it conjured out of thin air to a big bank at 0%. Now, thanks to the fraud of fractional reserve lending, these bankers are allowed to lend out $35 for every dollar they take in. But here's the point. When they received the funny money at 0% interest, they can then turn around and roll over their loans at 0% interest. And so the big bank that takes in $1 million of worthless Federal Reserve $1 trillion of worthless Federal Reserve notes at 0% interest can then lend out 35 trillion US dollars at 0% interest to Bank B.
Wow.
Bank B gets the $35 trillion at 0% interest, and it goes and rolls it over. And so that's 35 times the $35 trillion at 0% interest. And so we have the Federal Reserve and just two of these big banks working together, and already they've counterfeited $1 quadrillion. And of course,
that's unbelievable when you put it that way. It's unreal.
So this is the whole point. You want to talk about the Dow at 30,000? Well, why not talk about it at 300,000? And if counterfeiting $1 quadrillion won't take the Dow to 300,000, well, they can just get 3 or 4 more banks to line up and counterfeit $1 quintillion. So, wow. This is the point. Infinite counterfeiting. This is the monetary model we have today, thanks to the fraud of 0% lending and the fraud of fractional reserve lending. So anything is possible with this level of fraud, and with a system with zero accountability, with criminal central banks that are allowed to conjure infinite quantities of counterfeit money.
Well, I guess I need to ask you, how do we wrap this up? What are your thoughts for people here as we close out 2016 and go into 2017?
Well, of course, as I was talking before, I was expecting a crash to be staged, several months ago, because the markets have already been taken to extreme bubble levels. There's no real money to be made by the crime syndicate. So why haven't we seen the crash? One way of explaining this is that the banking crime syndicate themselves are afraid to pull the trigger. And it's because of the things I've been saying. Our economies have now been taken to the point of bankruptcy. The currencies are already totally worthless. So if they stage a crash and we have this, another repeat of 2008, except even worse, we have economies that are already bankrupt, so there's no reserves to do further borrowing. We have, currencies that have already been taken to zero. So, you can conjure more, but you can't dilute something below worthlessness. So, the point is, at some point, no matter how much control this crime syndicate possesses over the system, they're going to stretch things till it snaps. And so, this is the scenario facing us. Either the banking crime syndicate stages a crash in some sort of semi-controlled manner, or they shy away from it, which is what they seem to be doing now, and in which case, the clock is still ticking. At some point, they simply will not be able to pervert and distort markets any longer, and things will just rupture on their own. So, there's no way of saying which scenario is going to come to pass, because, we're not the ones that are sitting in control of the system. They can detonate things, they can try to hold things together. The only way we would know for sure which is coming next is if we were actually sitting in on one of the meetings of this cabal.
Well, hey, I got a lot to be chewing on for the next 24 hours here after this phone call. Jeffrey Nielson, everyone. Jeff, if people want to learn more about what you do, where would they go, and what would they find?
Well, my home base is bullionbullscanada.com, and that's where I've been putting out commentaries for the last 8 years. I'm also a contributing writer to Sprott Money. That's a financial investment company up in Canada, which is doing the best to kind of tell people the truth about precious metals and promote precious metals. And I recently started a new gig with a company called Stockhouse Publishing, where I'm working to promote junior corporations. These are the companies that actually create jobs and actually come up with new ideas. And so it's a really nice change of pace working as an advocate for these businesses.
Wow. Well, Jeff, congratulations on that new gig, and I wish you the best. You're one of the best in the industry, and I look forward. You're one of the people I listen to, and I wait for things to happen. So, again, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for the kind words, and as I said, it's always a pleasure to be here, so I'll be happy to come back anytime.